forward and start going with this. So thanks for joining in, and I hope that you all didn't have too much trouble getting on here. I'm gonna go ahead and check one more time to see if anybody else has registered and make sure that they get the invite. And let's see, keep saying that, I'm sorry, now I'm checking my emails. It keeps saying that it's invitation only, but I have sent them an invitation. Okay, this is not cool. I don't know how to get them in here if it's invitation only. Hang on one second. This, new software, and they're gonna get a huge email from me with this issue tomorrow. All right, anybody else who can't get in, they're gonna have to watch the recording. So welcome to Networking with Environmental Professionals. And we're gonna talk about making life-changing connections through networking. And I just wanna mention too that I'm on a trip with family and I'm at my dad's house, which is not where I normally do this from. And he has 3 giant dogs in kennels in the basement. And they have been kind of restless down there. One of them is a retired police dog. He's quite a beast and has an excellent, stellar career history. So if you hear any weird noises in the background, that's just them asking to come out and play. I have turned off, I want to turn off the public chat, but I think I'm going to leave it on. So we're not going to be having a whole lot of discussion going on the side. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A part, and Nousheen and I will cover those at the end. There is a poll question here if you didn't notice. And then there's also under the handouts is the download for the 5 keys to making life-changing connections through networking, which has a little bit more detail and information that you can review after this webinar. So I'm going to do some welcome and intros, and then I'm going to talk about why are we doing networking and some of my stories from networking. And we'll talk about the types of networking events, how you can find them, best practices for networking, and then I will get into the interview with Nousheen. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my face because I know that I keep looking at myself, and I want you to focus on the screen here. So hang on a second. Camera. Okay, so hopefully, let's see. Let me know in the chat if you can still hear me. It actually turns off your mic for a second for some reason. And let's go ahead and move on. So the first thing I want to do is introduce Nousheen. She is a friend of mine that I've actually met through networking over the years. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science and Policy from the University of South Florida. She was the vice president of the TBAP at USF in 2016. And she's saying, hey there in the chat. She's a Public Affairs Bureau, worked at the Public Affairs Bureau at the Southwest Florida Water Management District as an intern. And she's a contributor and editor-in-chief positions with the Layla and USF branch of the Odyssey Online. And she is currently the coordinator of the orientation and new student connections at Into USF. She's a very enigmatic and wonderful person, and you will get to know her in just a little bit. And hang on one second, I've got a message in the chat I want to check. Okay, it's all good. And so who am I? I'm Laura Thorne. I am the past president of the Tampa Bay Association of Environmental Professionals. And this is where I got my interest in helping students and career changers to kind of plan ahead and really think about and make a plan for what they want to do. I've seen a lot of students all making the same mistakes and ending up in the same frustrations, or not even mistakes necessarily, but just following the same kind of path, a lot of waiting till they graduate to figure out what they want to do. And because of that, I founded this environmental career coach position. And then I have been the leader of the Women in STEM Environmental Careers in Tampa since 2015. We have a workshop every year, and it has been sold out, which is really cool. A lot of fun people and a great networking experience if you live in the Tampa area. Tampa Bay Association of Environmental Professionals and the National Association, depending where you live, is a great organization to be a part of if there is a chapter. It's in many parts of the country, but not everywhere. They hold purposeful networking events and also encourage students to come. So it's a nice, safe place to have an event. And I have 13 years experience in environmental science. And also I'm currently on the conference planning committee for the National Association of Environmental Professionals, and we'll be holding an emerging professionals workshop on March 11th, which is the opening day of the 2018 conference in Tacoma. And I'm also a certified project manager. And let's go on. So what is networking? It's an opportunity to meet other people with your interest. It should be mutually beneficial, and it's just getting to know people. I think the word implies that there's something more to it. It's really just a means of a place for people to get together to meet, and it can happen in various locations, which I will talk about. And I've got a couple of pictures of the different things. So these are TBAP events. One is a volunteer group, the other is an orientation meeting, and the other is an actual networking get-together. And so you can see in the different pictures, it's just people hanging out. It's not anything scary. It doesn't have to be. There isn't anybody staring at someone else trying to figure out what they're doing or who they're talking to. It's usually pretty casual. And it isn't, what I like to talk about is what networking is not. It's not a public interview. It isn't a fashion contest. It isn't a place where you need to feel like you're being scrutinized, because it's just not what it is. And so why you should make yourself network. Typically, it's free or inexpensive. It could be a lunch or a training, which then, of course, would have cost or could have cost. It is the most effective way to get a lead on a job. So if you're actually networking and actually talking to people, and it may not happen instantaneously, it's not going to happen the first time you talk to somebody, but you may meet someone who knows someone else, and they may, if they remember you, decide to say, hey, can you let so-and-so know that we have this job available? Or you may be talking to somebody and letting them know what your interests are, and they already have an idea for you. And so you may then go home and get on LinkedIn and meet somebody that they suggested you contact. And that gives you this thing that's called a referral. So referrals are golden. That means that I can go to anybody I've never met in the world and say, hey, you know Nousheen? And they like Nousheen, right? So you say, hey, Nousheen said I should give you a call. And that immediately gets her attention and gets you a foot in the door. So the more people you know, the more people you can do that with, the more opportunities you make for yourself. And so in conjunction with that, it leads to long-lasting benefits. So like I said, I've met Nousheen, I can't even remember when, but several years ago, networking. And I then started these webinar series, and I thought, hey, who would be great at this? I'm going to call up Nousheen. I haven't talked to Nousheen in quite a while, but because we had met in this previous setting and had that connection, I had no problem getting her to jump in and say yes. So that's awesome. And that's a perfect example. Another great example is just the fact that I was president of the TBAP. I had been going to meetings for a while, and I noticed that the president at the time was also actually a younger woman than I was. And she was also had a very highly successful career and was traveling the world. And she just seemed to have her junk together. So I made a point to meet her and ask her, hey, can we meet up sometime? Because I'd like to know how you got here. And I would say, what was it? 2 years later, I was the vice president of TBAP myself. So you have to open the doors for yourself, and networking is one of the ways to do that. And then, so where can you find networking situations, these golden opportunities? And I already mentioned associations and groups that are purposefully set up for networking. These could be young professional groups, Toastmasters. Toastmasters is for learning how to public speak, which is a fantastic organization as well. Meetups, and they could be other student groups, like there's student chapters of our TBAP group. And there are other, like I said, young professional groups, lots of student-led organizations, and the college also have professional equivalent. You can also, and I think this was one of Nousheen's examples, was you can continue to network once you've gotten a job or an internship. So don't even consider that networking is something you do until you find a job. It's an excellent skill to have throughout your career and your life. So being able to, like for instance, I just moved from Tampa, where I was, like I said, president of a very large organization, and moved to Syracuse, which has a tiny population compared to Tampa. And networking, having the skill to network, has boosted me beyond what I would have if I did not have an idea of how to go meet people in public and make an impression and follow up with people and build relationships with total strangers. That's really what networking, maybe I should add that to the slide. So building a relationship with a stranger is networking. Online is another way, and we're going to be talking LinkedIn next month, or no, next month. And online is a great way. There's groups in Facebook, there are Instagram pages and other ways to meet people online. So you don't necessarily have to get started leaving your house or do a combination. I already mentioned meetups, but meetup.com is official, but there's other kind of get-togethers. Like I said, Facebook events and groups and LinkedIn groups are other ways to network. So what are the best practices then for effective networking? And if you go over to the handouts, there's a little handout button up there, and you'll be able to download a very detailed guide of networking for environmental professionals specifically. There are 5 keys that I believe will set you on a great path to networking. And these are those. One is a positive and opportunistic mindset. And that really is one of the biggest things. If you go to a networking event and your mindset is that it's a waste of time, or nobody wants to talk to you, or you don't have something to offer, you might not likely have a very good experience. But if you go there knowing that it's just a casual event, and you are going to, maybe you set a goal for yourself to talk to one person. If you just talk to one person, you go home, you've met your goal. So when I talk about planning ahead, that is part of it, is actually setting an actual goal for yourself. I have seen people go to networking events and actually just go and sit by themselves, and they never really get the courage or whatever it takes to get up and say something to somebody else. And, you know, that's okay. Nobody's judging, nobody cares. And it's really up to you to kind of find a way to get a foot in the door. And there are a lot of ways to do that. And Nousheen and I will talk about some of those coming up soon. And then you want to make an impression. So making an impression doesn't mean doing a dance in front of anybody or being the class clown, but it means that you are professional, you're able to speak confidently, that you have some intelligent things to say. And it also leads into number 4 with having a follow-up. If you go to a networking event, talk to some people and never contact them again, they will not think of you again. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that you weren't well liked. That's just life. And persistence. So if you've gone to one networking event and it didn't change your life, I'm not surprised. You have to become involved. And the more people see your face, it's kind of like advertising. You know, you have to see something several times before it becomes familiar with you. And after a while, somebody's going to say, hey, I saw you here last time. How's it going? And, you know, maybe the second, third time they remember your name. Whereas, you know, that doesn't mean anything negative at all. It's perfectly fine in the way that things go. So I would like to now get ready to interview Nousheen, and she's going to come up in here. I'm going to take one little second though, Nousheen, before we get started, to email back the two people who are trying to get on and cannot get in here, and I don't know how to let them in because I've invited them and it's telling them they need an invite. So I just want to let them know that this will be recorded and apologize. So let me get 1 second for that. Unless you want to start talking, I can give you that chance too.
I'll let you go ahead and send out the email.
Okay, so if everyone can just hang tight for 1 minute while I, so we do have Bethany and Phil were able to get in. So it's just poor Nick. Sorry, Nick. So let me just email Nick real quick. Back to benefits of networking. Nick is a friend from networking, and he was a recent graduate, and he even helped me to test this webinar out, and that was all good. And since he is a friend, this makes this a lot easier. Why it didn't work and how to let you in. I'll get back to him later. Okay, so I'm going to remove the slides for a minute and I will. Okay, there we are. Thanks, Nousheen. All right. I gotta pull up my questions for her. So Nousheen, first of all, thank you for joining.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. And let's see. All right, so I'm just going to jump into questions now, unless you have anything to add before I get started.
Nope, go right ahead.
Okay, so if I look weird, I'm looking around, it's because I'm bouncing back looking at the questions I'm going to ask her. All right, so I'm a student and I'm about to graduate in a couple months, and I'm thinking I want to start networking, but I'm really not sure. So what kind of advice would you have for me in my first networking adventure?
So if you are just about to start networking right before you're about to graduate, I think the biggest thing that I would say is to not seem desperate or like you're trying to do something last minute. So if you're about to graduate, you might be thinking, okay, I need to start getting some job offers right now. And you may or may not have something on your plate. And in the case that you don't, going to a networking event and using that as your last lifeline could possibly be the worst thing you do at a networking event, because like you were saying, Laura, it's a casual event where it's not a public interview. People are just going there to hang out with other professionals in their field after work. And the last thing they want is someone breathing down their neck, trying to lead to the point of, do you have a job for me, right? It's not, the intention is not to get a job right out of that networking event, right? It's to get connections that you build for a long time. So definitely going in mind with that. And going to your first networking event, no matter what time of your educational career you're going in, you always just have to remember to be yourself, as cliche as it sounds, but just going in and being ready to have natural and genuine conversations with people.
Okay, great. So how did you go? Did you go by yourself to your first event, and how did you decide where you were going to go? Or
for sure, did not go by myself. It can be very, some people manage to do it themselves, and to me, it's just very intimidating to go alone, especially when I started networking, I want to say my sophomore year of college. So for me, it was really terrifying to be in a room full of people who seemingly looked like they had all of their stuff together and they were really successful. Being a working adult now, I know that is 100% not the case.
Right. That's true.
All a lie. Nobody has all their stuff together all the time. That's just not the case. But at that point in your life, it feels like there are people that are strides ahead of you. And they might be, but you never really know what's going on in the background. And I definitely didn't go by myself. And I heard about the networking events through the TBAP, as I was just a student member then. So this was before I became vice president at TBAP. And I decided to go with a few other student members and some of the officers and everything. And it really helps going with other people, especially other people who have common goals as you, right? And you're kind of there to support one another. And it really helps to have one another, to start talking to each other and helping each other break the ice with other professionals that you otherwise might be afraid to approach first.
That's a good point. I think the last networking event I went to, I remember, what was that, like 8 students all came at the same time, and then they all went and sat by themselves.
Right. But on the flip
So
side, you want to make sure that when you're going with friends, that you're not just making it a night out
yeah.
at World of Beer with all of you, right?
Free
It's okay
food.
to use one another to kind of be comfortable, but by that point, after a little while, you want to divide and conquer, right?
Yeah. I'm actually not even sure. I remember going to a networking event. I do remember not really talking to anyone. Like if you're having that, oh gosh, like I don't know who I'm going to talk to. And then eventually I saw somebody I knew, it's like it just takes a little bit of time.
For sure.
And then if you see that person, like make a beeline. Hey, how's it
Absolutely.
going?
Yeah.
um, all right, cool. So we've got up the courage to go and everything. So what did you do? Like, what do you do when you're there? And what if I'm like afraid to be seen by myself, like we were talking about?
So people really don't care if you're standing there by yourself, right? If I've seen plenty of times, just even the professional adults who I would be expecting to go up to and talk to, they're just sitting there by themselves. And it's also important to keep in mind, like you were saying, that when you get a job or when you get that internship, that's not your sign to stop networking. If anything, it's your sign to continue networking. And that's the case for adults and professionals that are seasoned in their field, right? Some people don't really go to a lot of networking events, and they might be looking for some sort of career change or just trying to get themselves out there. And they have to start networking even 10,
Right.
15 years into their career. And sometimes those might be the people that are sitting alone. So you're not the only one, even as a college student, who's out there trying to put themselves out there. So it's not to be worried about if you're sitting there alone, but you definitely, for your benefit and for the fact of the purpose of why you went there, you definitely want to talk to, if you have the goal of just 1 people, if you have the goal of 5 people, you definitely want to try to meet that goal. And if anything, if you're trying to look for certain types of people to talk to, just ask people what they do for a living and then go from there, right? That leads to so many different conversations.
That's a good starter question. What if I don't drink? So I know TBAP, environmental professionals are fun-loving people. I will tell you that. And as working professionals, they work, especially the private folks, they work a lot of hours and they work pretty hard. So at the end of the day, a lot of them want to kick back with a beer or something. But especially if you're a student and maybe you're not even old enough, like I know that you were of that in that situation. So like, what did you do?
So, like I said, I started networking when I was a sophomore, and I was not 21 at that time. So, all of the networking events, every single one of them from here until Sunday, would be at a pub, a brewery, a bar.
Yeah.
Every single one of them, because, like you said, people just like to kick back and have a beer or have a glass of wine. And in that case, I would really advise, if you're not old enough, or if you don't drink because that's your own preference, have a glass of water in your hands. Have a cup. I don't know what it is about humans and their interactions in a public setting like that, but you just feel so much more comfortable talking to people when you have a glass or a cup in your hand. It's just a weird thing. I felt very strange when I couldn't drink and then I wouldn't have anything. Actually, one place that I went to literally did not have soda or water. They only had
No.
yeah, they only had alcohol. And I was like, okay, I'll just stand here now. So it feels really weird when everybody else is like sipping and being casual and everything. But in that case, you definitely don't want it to set you back too much. And you also don't want to be held back from going just because it's at a pub or a brewery and you're not old enough and you don't drink, right? That's not the main reason that people are going. Some people, that might be the main reason if they've had a really bad day at work, but for the most part, it's not the main reason people are going. And you just want to focus on the conversations and the interactions, because at the end of the day, they don't care if you're not drinking. They're not caring if you're standing alone. They're really caring about the type of conversation you're having with them and whether it was a fruitful conversation or not. I think we all seek to have meaningful conversations with people that we meet. And so at the other end, they're looking for the same thing.
Right. And actually, there's usually, well, not usually, but at least at the TBAP ones, there was food. So you could have food in your hand instead of a drink. Although you're not going to stuff your face all night, but you could carry a little plate around.
Sure. And that definitely really helped. Yeah. The TBAP events were really good about having just bar food or finger foods and everything. So it was really nice.
And I will say, if you are a woman and able to, not even a woman, anybody, a lot of times I would start talking to somebody and they would offer to buy me a drink. So, you could start talking to somebody without a hand, or you could offer to buy somebody else a drink too. That's a nice way to if you want to be remembered, if you're of age and you're talking to somebody who doesn't have a drink in their hand, that's an excellent way to meet somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we talked about, like I just said, asking to buy someone a drink, or if they, maybe they want a soda. Or what did you just say about what do you do? So how else can you go about starting a conversation?
Sometimes it's just about looking at a person who doesn't seem to be engaged in a conversation, or a lot of times in a networking event, you will see 3, 4, 5 people standing in a conversation, but you'll see, if you look at their body language, you'll see that they're not in a closed conversation, right? You have to kind of detect it and see, does it look like it's open to conversation for everyone, right? And you should not be afraid to just stand there and jump into the conversation
Yeah.
where we're relevant, right? You want to do it tactfully, obviously. And I think that goes for any situation, not just networking, but you definitely just want to try to engage with as many people as possible, because there are people who haven't seen each other in years who are meeting there, and there are people who are having conversations who they've just met and they're learning about what the other is doing. And I know that as a college student who's networking, you don't have that situation of telling them what you do for a living, because you're just studying and working your butt off for a living essentially, so you can have that life. But at that point, you just want to be interested in asking them what they do, right? A lot of people love talking about themselves, and a lot of times it's just about asking what a day at work is like for them, right? And even just leading with that question, say, well, hey, I have a few questions for you because I'm interested in going into this field and I'm wondering what you're doing, right? And if you happen to see someone, a lot of times they come in their company shirts or they have a name tag on with their job position written on it. And if you see someone who, I mean, they're, say you want to be a consultant, you want to go into private, and you see someone in a shirt from a private company, you should by all means tell them, this is what I'm interested in. Can you please tell me more about it, right? You definitely want to use those cues and be as observant as possible.
Yeah, that's a good word, to be observant. Um, I think too, I've read somewhere about trying to talk to somebody who's maybe standing in groups of three, odd numbers, threes or fives, because there's usually that extra person who's not getting the full part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, they may ask you, they're not going to always assume that just because you look young that you're not working. So even if you're a student and someone asks you, hey, what do you do? You can say that I'm a student. This is what I'm studying. This is what I'm interested in. And if you've downloaded the networking guide, it talks a little bit more about how to plan and to make your pitch. You should be able at least to not just like if you're standing there and someone says to you, Nousheen, like, hey, what do you do? And you're like, well, I'm just a student. That
Right.
doesn't offer a whole lot of information. So you want to have a response to that question, or just when you meet somebody and they're like, what are you interested in, that you have at least something intelligent to say.
Sure. Yeah.
So is there anything that I shouldn't talk about? Like, I don't want to get blacklisted from anybody, or
You don't want to ask about pay rates and compensation at this type of event. That is a big no-no. That is something that you can Google. There's Glassdoor and everything, but this is not a place for you to ask about how much a certain job or field pays. It's
good
just,
point.
that's a big mood killer for people. A lot of people don't like to talk about how much they're paid. And a lot of times people who work in the public sector in the environmental field often feel that they're really underpaid, and they are. 100% people in the public sector are 100% underpaid. So that's something that you don't want to trigger. But other than that, you don't want to go in straight up saying, I'm looking for a job in this field, right? As a student, if you've already introduced yourself as a college student who's pursuing a certain field, clearly your end goal is a job, right? That doesn't need to be put out there. And it does sound strange to say, but you don't want to make it seem like you're just having that conversation because you want a job. And that also shouldn't be the reason that you're having that conversation, because you could be talking to, you could want to be an environmental specialist, and you could be talking to a civil engineer and thinking, this person will do nothing for my career, but that civil engineer could come in handy for you as a reference at any point in your time and looking for a job, right? So it's about
Absolutely.
remembering that the quality of the conversations you're having, and not just for the goal of getting a job.
Right.
So that's part of keeping in mind that you just want to keep it natural. And if jobs and internships come up, roll with it, right? But definitely not trying to force it into the conversation is something to remember.
Yeah. What about like politics and religion? I know I don't care if I'm at a networking event or with my family. I don't like to talk about either of those things.
Yeah, I think especially with the current political climate, I personally don't like talking about politics and religion, and a lot of people just don't. They don't even like talking about it in their workplace, in their family, and for some, it's just not a topic. Some people like talking about it all the time because they just like getting in heated arguments with people. Some people really thrive off of that, right? But also, you don't want to do anything that could set the mood off, right? Because this is a time for people to really relax and just have a social
Right.
setting that has sort of professional implications, right? So
Yeah.
definitely not doing anything that could make anyone heated,
I
because
think that's the key is like just keep it casual, and
for
it's
sure,
just
yeah,
this first meeting isn't the time to get into real deep conversation. Maybe after you've met somebody a couple of times.
sure, absolutely.
Um, what about business cards? So I've read both that I should have a card with me and I should hand it out. And, what do you think about that?
So I've heard that plenty of times as well. And during my undergrad, I think I only heard about that when I was probably my junior or senior year. And at that point, I personally didn't choose to do that. But I've seen people who have done it, right? They'll put a link to their website if you have one, or a LinkedIn. I would say in that case, if you do it, not to overkill it, not to oversell yourself, because at the end of the day, yes, you are a college student, right? Um, that's a great thing for you, but also you don't want to um, make it seem like you're trying too hard and trying to be like, I'm already a professional, here you go, and everything. It's
Right.
it's a good way to get people interested in you. And I would say to keep it very simple with the graphics. And if you do put a LinkedIn or a website, that it's something that you actively update. Don't just put a link for the sake of putting it. I'm currently
Right.
hiring employees right now, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen a LinkedIn linked and there's nothing on it. And it's not just impressive enough just to put the link, but when someone clicks on it, and you better believe they will, that there should be something fruitful on there and something of actual substance on there.
Right. That's true. You don't want to give out something that's more harmful than helpful,
For sure.
for sure. Let's see. And I didn't do a card myself, and I feel like my networking was pretty okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's a huge necessity, especially at that point in your career. I think it definitely sets you apart from other students because nobody really does it. But as
Right.
long as you make it appropriate to your experience, and you just kind of put your contact info and your major, definitely your major, and just really simple stuff.
So is there anything else like if I was still unsure about going or what to do when I get there, before we get into what to do after networking?
Just remembering when you go in that it is time that you're investing, right? So when you're going there, like you said, that if your first networking experience did not change your life, don't be surprised, because it took me many networking events to actually make those connections that I have now, including you, Laura, right? So
Right.
right now you were more of a friend to me than just a professional networking and someone to put on my references, right? So it's about building that relationship that you don't even realize, but as you're going to the networking events, you have these people who are kind of consistent. And most of the time, the people who go regularly tend to go and keep it consistent, especially people who are directly involved in the organization or are friends with the people that are directly involved, right? It becomes a matter of 6 degrees of separation. That's how these networking events happen. And I think it's definitely important to remember that it takes a few conversations, sometimes just a hi and a hello, and to build up to something else. And this is something that you want to remember, that all these connections that you make one day will come in handy. For example, I recently got asked to be on a mini grant approval committee for a nonprofit organization. And the person that asked me to do that is the chair of that committee, who I have been networking with actually since my sophomore year, right? And she has been a reference for me and when I have applied for jobs. And it's something that I never even realized until it happened, that I can actually rely on this person and contact them after months of not having talked to them. And they can still say, yeah, I know who you are. I know what kind of person you are and what you're interested in. And I feel comfortable speaking about you, right? Because you definitely want to remember, when you're asking someone to be a reference for you, they're not just speaking about themselves, but you are a reflection on them, right? They're putting their identity, their image on the line and referring you. And if you turn out not to be a good candidate, immediately employers will start to wonder, well, this person referred them, right? And what came of it. So you definitely want to remember that you're asking someone to put themselves out there for you. And when you're networking, you definitely want to remember that you want to really show them who you are as a person, right? Not just a person who's on the market for a job, right? You're more than that for sure. So yeah.
No, that's a great example, and congratulations for being asked. That's a lot of fun. True. The better that your networking connections are, the more obligated you're going to be to do things and get volunteered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But it's great. It all expands your experience. And, the big thing is that you may not even realize, like Nousheen said, until later that, you can't really necessarily count how successful your networking has been. Like, I will tell you that, yes, you should go into networking and maybe have a plan if it makes it easier for you to say, okay, I'm going to talk to 3 people and then I can say, okay, I'm done. I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish for the evening. If that is something that will help you get through it. But on the other hand, you don't want to be like, I'm going to give out 20 cards and that's my goal. It has to be quality over quantity. And you're not going to be able to necessarily know if you're successful until several months or years later. And it's all about how genuine you are. And I think the more genuine you are, the more your chances are that you'll have these connections going forward. And that's why Nousheen has been so successful, is because she's a genuine person. So
and on that note of business cards, of handing out business cards, I know that a lot of times when you go to a networking event, you 100%, if you had a genuine enough and a good quality conversation with someone, you want to get their business card, right? But you also don't want to let that turn into, I need to collect 20 business cards by the end of the night. Right? You don't want to make it seem like you're just after them for that square piece of paper. And it's okay if you don't get a business card from every single person you've talked to, right? And it's also just not a prize to be looked at. It's something that where at the end of the conversation you say, okay, let's exchange, are you okay with exchanging cards? Just something very natural and organic like that, right? And you don't want to have to just say, hi, my name is, I study this, can I have your business card? It seems at that point it starts seeming unnatural. And you will notice many times that, I don't know if you guys have ever been networking. I know that we're going to probably ask you that question later on, but I don't know if you've noticed that it tends to happen really naturally most of the time. Unless you're really trying to force something, most of those cues happen really naturally on their own.
Right. And that's a good segue into following up. So if I did meet people and I got their card, or maybe I didn't, if I can just remember their name. So what do I do? What do I do after that? So I've gone to the event and now I've gone home, and now what?
So definitely the next day, probably the next morning, you want to get all those cards and you want to start sending individual emails out, and you don't want it to be a generic one, right? It's if you've had a meaningful conversation with someone where, say, you talk to someone about what they do, or you found common ground in some passion or some volunteer experience, you definitely want to include that in the email. You want to give them the cues of who you are, right? And start sort of embedding yourself in their memory. If you didn't have any sort of personalized conversation with them like that, it's okay to put, I met you last night at this networking event. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you at future events. Something as simple as that, right? If you didn't have that type of conversation with someone, it's totally okay to put something like that. But if you had a deeper conversation with them, definitely want to follow up with that, right? Or I found a really good way to keep up conversations with people is recommending books to them or recommending studies to them. And it's a really good way to get the ball rolling.
That's a good idea. It's always a good idea to be able to offer something to other people. And that's something I still have to learn. Some people are really good at that. But if you're not, it doesn't mean that you're not a caring person, but I'm always thinking 10 steps ahead of myself. So if I'm going to a meeting or something, I'm not thinking I'm always forgetting things. I'm not remembering to bring a book suggestion or a quote or something like that. But yeah, if you can get in the habit of doing those type of things. I just went to a membership. It was a orientation meeting for a different group of people, and they had a canned food drive, and I didn't think about picking something up until I was on my way. So if you can find, that's a great example of something to do to be remembered, is just offer something special.
Yeah.
Like that. And then how do you feel about connecting on LinkedIn? I'm a LinkedIn collector. I'll be happy for all of you on this webinar to connect with me. I accept everyone unless you're completely 100% salesy and I don't know you at all. But I like to connect with people on LinkedIn, but some people are a little bit more like personal with it. So what do you think?
I definitely did not use LinkedIn too heavily. I for sure made sure my resume was always updated on it, and any other award certifications I tried to fill out as much of it as I could, but that was sort of the extent of it. I would just go on every few weeks and update things as needed. But on that note, after a networking event, I would, if I had someone's business card, I would look them up and see what they had on there, and I would add them, right? And a lot of times you might find that you have no connections in common with them, and at that point, I know that LinkedIn has that option to send someone a message when you have no
Right.
no common connections with them, and that's also a good way of reaching out to them. But I would definitely say try to use LinkedIn to your advantage. Some people have different opinions about it. The fact that it's irrelevant or becoming obsolete, but it's still, as long as you utilize it in the right way and keep it updated, it's something that can do good, and you really have nothing to lose except the time that you're putting into updating it. And if you've spent time making it as good as you possibly can, then you really lost nothing at all.
Right. I feel like it's another avenue. So maybe email didn't work, but you could try LinkedIn. It's another way to reach people because everybody's using different methods these days. Um, so, all right. So let's see. Let's wrap this up so we can get to questions. But so do you have any advice for like, okay, I went to an event, like what should I do before I go back to the next one, or
You
things you wish
definitely
you did
want to
different?
keep an eye out. You definitely want to keep an eye out and everything. And as for doing something different, if you had some sort of situation where it just got real awkward with someone, I remember my first networking event, I went and then the conversation just wasn't going too well. And then I'm pretty sure I just dropped it and was like, okay, I'm gonna go now. Bye. Like it felt really, really, there was no grace in it, right? Possible. I mean, it was socially terrifying. And I remember it bothered me a lot. And if you ever have situations like that happen, people don't tend to remember that stuff. And it's more embedded in your head than it is in theirs. So definitely shaking it off from
Sure.
last time. And if you didn't make as many connections or have good quality conversations like you wanted, just to make sure you go and see how you can better that, right? Going up to different types of people, or just trying to go up to more people and seeing, what kind of conversations you can grab. Just before you go back, definitely making sure that you do go back to one that's sooner rather than later, because more than likely you'll see some of the same people there. They might have decided that they want to go to two in a row, right? And you'll see some of the same people, and it's a really good way to be like, I saw you at the last one. How are you doing? How's everything been? So consistency is key, especially when you're an undergraduate or a master's student. Excuse me, going to those events over and over again.
Yeah. I agree. So let's last question. What's like your biggest takeaway from your networking experiences?
Definitely that it's an investment that pays back. It just, from my experiences and the conversations that I still have with people, and the fact that I have many people that I can still use as connections even after networking with them just 3 or 4 times. It's definitely reminded me that it takes a long time to see a result, but eventually you will see a result. And sometimes you won't see it until you realize that you need someone, and then you have someone in your back pocket that you can rely on. And also you get a really good, you get some really good friendships out of it too. You meet all sorts of people that start meeting socially outside of the networking events. And it's really important to remember the quality of it over the quantity of it.
Oh yeah, it grows. I remember there was one girl who worked at another government agency, and I would see her everywhere. Like we hung out in the same circles, and it was like, hey. And for the first couple of times, it was just like, hey, I know you, And then it was like, then we knew each other's names, and then we were being invited to the same parties, and
Absolutely.
so that's another lifelong friend. I have other people I've met through networking that I've been on international trips with, and it's a great way to find your mentor too if you're in the situation where you're still trying to find someone who has that job or position you want to be in the future, and start building that connection. It's really a great way to go. So, all right, well, thank you for all of that, Nousheen, and I'm going to flip us over to the Q&A. So there's one question in here right now. Oh, there's a couple questions actually. So let's start. I'm going to read them, Nousheen, and you can try to answer them at first. Okay, so Phil has asked, so what about when you graduated and you're unemployed or underemployed, and someone asks you what you do? What do you think you should do with your elevator pitch in that situation?
Definitely it's okay to be honest, right? The job market is tough, right?
Yeah.
And if you've noticed, Philip, from my bio, that I'm actually not even working in the environmental field right now, right? And those were choices that I made myself. But when I go back to networking events, I'm actually kind of afraid of people asking me, but you're not working in the environmental field, right? And I went to one event since changing careers for now, and I honestly just told them that I'm very passionate about this, and it's just a choice I made on my own. And in your case, if you're talking about being unemployed or underemployed, you definitely want to seem, you don't want to make it seem like it's I don't know how to word it, but let's see. You don't want to make it seem like you're at the networking event because you're unemployed or underemployed, right? It's definitely something you want to make it come off as, I'm here to just keep networking with people and trying to make as many connections as I can. And obviously I am on the job market, and I'm trying to play my options and see what's out there for me, right? It's really okay to say something like that, and there's no shame in letting people know that that you're not currently employed right now, right? So because I can guarantee you half the people in that room have been in your situation 100%.
Oh, Nousheen just froze. Okay, I didn't hear that very last thing you said, Nousheen.
Yeah, you froze on me too, but I was about to say
Okay.
I can guarantee you that half the people in the room have been in your situation before.
Absolutely.
And they can definitely relate to it. So it's not something that you should be afraid to say, right? And you definitely don't have to feel like you have to say something else to avoid saying that. It's all part of that honesty and having that genuine conversation with people.
Absolutely. I just had a conversation a few days ago with someone who Nousheen, but he has been looking for a job forever, and he's awesome. I love this dude. He's like so
Exactly what you're talking
positive.
about.
He's so positive and so just like such a great person and really smart. And just for some reason, it just hasn't worked. But that's it, depending on how you're feeling of how the world works. Sometimes it's just not the right moment, and sometimes you might be chasing the wrong thing. I know for my own self, if a door doesn't open, maybe it's not supposed to, right? So then if someone asks me that question, then I'm going to say, well, I've been trying some things, and I'm still looking, and if you have any advice for me, this is the kind of thing, it's like use it, go with it. No one's going to you aren't a loser. It's not like shameful, like you said, Nousheen. It's just the way it is. And like you said, it isn't about comparing yourself to everybody there, because everyone's been on their own path to get there. And some of them are way ahead on the journey, or like this person I'm talking about, it's just been this case, and that's just the way it is. And let's see. Eileen says, I concur with Philip. I haven't worked in the last few years due to health and family. I'm afraid of the questions about what you've been doing in the last few years. So, health and family. Any ideas there, Nousheen?
Well, in that case, depending on how you want to present the idea, I know that it's obviously completely up to you if you tell them about the health and family situations, right? Those are very personal things that I'm sure you've been going through, but sometimes it's just a matter of being honest with them and telling them, for personal reasons, for family issues, I've just not been working for other issues. 100%, nobody's ever going to judge you for these things, for both Eileen and Philip, right? Most of the time they're going to encourage you and support you and motivate you. That's my experience. That's what's been my experience. So I was really struggling to find an internship when I was in my undergrad. And I know that's completely different from what you've been going through, but it's the most similar thing I can think of, where I was struggling to find something, and I really had no excuse for it, right? There was no reason for me. I didn't find something until my very last semester. And whenever I spoke to anyone about it, they were 100% supportive and motivated me and gave me advice. And in your case, I would expect that in tenfold, because of that you have underlying personal reasons for it. And so when they ask you about the last few years, they're not really literally going to ask you, what were you doing in January of 2017, right? They're never going to ask you about that. And more often than not, they're really just interested to see what you're trying to do next, right? And that's where you talk about, I'm interested in going back into this next. I'm really excited about going back into it, or I'm thinking about doing something new. Yeah. And that's the point where they offer advice, or you just start having a conversation about it.
That's a really good point. It's not really about what you done. It's about what you want to do and what you're willing to do. And, what can I do going forward? So again, how much you can or want to say about what those situations are is not something we can tell you. But use it. I had somebody else ask me about a same kind of a similar thing, but in an interview. What if they ask me about a health issue? Just tell them how it should, how you deal with it and overcome it, and how it is actually, a lot of people don't realize that overcoming a health issue or disability makes them superhero compared to people who don't have to deal with that stuff. So, if you're able to do what everyone else does despite things, that's awesome. And yeah, and just talk about, okay, I've been out of it for a couple years. What advice do you have for me? I think people love to give you advice.
Yeah.
Giving people the opportunity to talk about themselves, or, what would you do? Even if you're not ever, that doesn't mean that you have to use the advice they give you, but they love to give it. So I would definitely use that to your advantage, and you could start some good conversations with it, actually. Okay, Phil's got another question here, I think. Nope, that's the same one. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. Nousheen, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Um, just other than really reinforcing the idea that it's something that you have to give a lot of time and effort into to see a return on that investment. That's just something I really try to remember. It can get really frustrating sometimes if you're networking and nothing's really coming of it. But you just to remember that it will come, right, if you give in that time and effort.
Yeah, I mean, it's all stuff that if you don't network, it's not going to work. You will continue to do your applications and interviews, but you won't get those extra little boosts of referrals and questions answered and stuff like that. So networking just gives you that little boost ahead. And so let's go ahead and wrap it up. Like I said, if you download the handbook, there's a little bit more detail and some information about like other ways to volunteer to go to a networking event. That's another way to meet people. There's some of those other suggestions in there. And next month, we're going to talk about leveraging your LinkedIn account. So that's not only how to make it look right, but also, and have the right information there, but also how to use it for some networking. And I'll be interviewing Michelle from the University of Michigan. Sorry for her not saying it at this moment, but she's had a lot of really good experience and has a really good, some good suggestions and things for that. So excited about that. So you can find us on the environmentalcareercoach.com and Facebook. And thanks, Nousheen, for joining us and answering all these awesome questions. I hope I get the chance to network with you again. So that's it for today's webinar. I thank you guys for joining, and sorry about the little bit of time wasting there in the beginning, getting everybody on. And have a great evening.
Have a good night.
All right, bye.